Welcome to Stories That Stay, how stories of identity shape us. This is a podcast where healing happens at the intersection of art, science, and storytelling. I'm Shamm Petros, a therapist, learning strategist, refugee, and reluctant creative.
And I'm Dwight Dunston, a facilitator, educator, artist, and proud uncle. Stories That Stay podcast is a project of Lion Story. In this episode, which is our last one of season 1, first wanting to just thank you, our listeners, for tuning in to our inaugural season. It was depthful, emotional, hilarious, sobering, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from our guests and from you, the listeners, that you've all found our conversations and our practices healing, cathartic, affirming, and inspiring. We started our season with Lisa Nelson Haynes, the executive director of Lion Story, in an episode called Love, Protection, and the Weight of Racial Stress. We then moved to Osahon Tongo's French Toast at Daycare. He spoke about love, care, and memory. We had rock star Merrill Garbus on whiteness, grief, and practice in an episode called Wonder and the Will to Live. We then bopped over to the UK with Inua Ellams, who spoke on identity, abandonment, and creative survival in an episode called The Weight of Difference. We had Mona Norfleet, who spoke on healing and belonging in an episode called Growing Up Biracial. And then we had fellow trainer Brian Caselli Jordan in an episode called Holding Love and Accountability in Our First Stories of Race. Lastly, we had a Lion Story board member, Dr. Darryl J. Ford, who spoke on race, resilience, and a generational legacy of education in an episode entitled Claiming Worth. Wow, Shamm, we had a powerful season.
We really did. Wow. I'm sitting here as if I wasn't there. I'm in shock and awe. I'm so grateful. So much richness shared with us. A lot of gratitude. Gratitude out of 10. I will say that, and I feel it in my heart. And for our last episode of this season, we want to be in conversation together because, we're a part of the people experiencing these stories too. But in conversation with one another, really about our learnings, our insights, and our hopes for the stories of this season and beyond. Let's prepare ourselves for the feelings, emotions, truths that will emerge. We want to take a moment to settle in together. Wherever you are, walking, driving, cooking, working, or resting, we invite you now to take a few breaths just for yourself, however you wish. Inhale, exhaling as you need, and continue inhaling and exhaling for the next 45 seconds with an audio reprieve. And remember to always keep breathing. So Dwight, I wanted to just start by asking you what we ask all our guests. How are you feeling about sharing today?
Wow, I'm feeling proud out of 10, grateful out of 10, a little sad here at the end of season 1, just a little sad, maybe at like a 3 or 4, and truly inspired also out of 10. It was such a rich and diverse guest list. When we set out to do this first season, we wanted to try and incorporate voices from different sectors, different walks of life, and different backgrounds, different experiences. And I feel like we accomplished that in the tapestry that these folks helped to build with their stories and their sharings and their vulnerabilities. It's just something that I know for me has just really brought home the power of this work. So that's some of the feelings and just a little bit about, as I reflect on the season, some things coming to mind. But I don't want to get too much into it before asking you the same question, Shamm, here at the end of our
Yeah.
first season together. How are you feeling? What are those feelings? Scale them for us.
Yeah, definitely that gratitude I mentioned. In my heart at a 10, I feel that loud and proud. Um, and you used the word tapestry, I believe, and that gave me a really strong image. My mind just kind of wandered to how every one of our guests had several tapestries of their own, right? And all the color and threads and weaving and unweaving we got to witness. Yeah, the feeling is very much imagery, a lot of imagery for me right now. It makes me want to smile. It gives me hope. And yeah, for us, even as people that have processed so many stories, we've done this in so many ways, but particularly in this model and fashion, I love that I'm never not surprised, if that makes sense. I'm very, but the work is very generative. So I guess more gratitude for that as well.
Sham, you've been doing this work of teaching people these skills and tools and techniques and interventions for years now. And I just think about your role at Lion Story is developing the curriculum, making it accessible to participants.
Mm.
And this is, the first time we're doing this in this setting, using podcasts as a way to teach these skills. Just in your role at Lion Story as an organization, I'm curious how you see the conversations in this medium of podcasts as a potential way to continue to build the skills to navigate moments of stress, racial
Mhm.
stress, identity stress with care, with resilience,
Mhm.
with thoughtfulness.
I mean, a big ode to you for encouraging this podcast format. So shout out to Dwight for really believing this is a space we should and can occupy. I was very reluctant, this, but what it has shown me as someone that designed learning tools and spaces, particularly to Lion Sir, because we are backed by now 40 years of rigorous research, right? Shepherded by Dr. Stevenson and a lot of his students. There was always a strong commitment to fidelity to the research, right? And the curriculum. And the tussle has always been, but we want a world that has these skills. We want everyone to have these skills. How do we democratize it by also protecting how rigorous this work is? Is rigorous work. We have the practices, the formulas, the lesson plans, the steps, the model, so that just dancing between those two standards, I'm committed to upholding. But the podcast, the number one thing about this work has always, I see it every time. Either we're training large groups of people, small teams, executives, or even, this well, Dwight, when we're even possibly talking to a future client that wants to book us. The moment they hear about this work, it's like they abandon, they go straight to, oh my gosh, there's hope. There's hope. Somebody here has hope, and it's legitimate hope. It's hope that I can quantify or calculate or look at. And I think that's the most important thing right now. So someone can hear this podcast, hear the stories across this platform, and just feel hopeful that their story matters. Most stories are all stories are tapestries, and there's a way to tell our stories and process them differently so we have more agency, right? So I hope that's what the space is doing for folks. Yeah, that was a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, there's something just about, and we often quote the poem by Nayyirah Waheed
Mm,
around, some people when they hear your story expand, others upon hearing your stories contract, and this is how right? There's
yeah.
just something about the power of our stories that open others up or, cause them to turn inward, and that's data, right? And,
Hmm.
going along that hope thread, I have to shout out Morgan Reed, who
Hmm.
had for many years was the director of operations, and
Hmm.
I feel like had the initial idea for a podcast. And I can remember hearing
Hmm.
Morgan's story, which was one of our
Hmm.
early recorded stories we use in
Yes.
trainings, and the ways I heard her, stand up for her brother in her stories, right? And
Hmm.
facilitating conversations from just a recording of her story, right? One could
Yeah.
even argue it was kind of a podcast format because she wasn't in the
Yeah.
room, but people listened to her story, and
Correct.
then we worked with them in relation to what
Mhm.
was coming up within them from her
Mhm.
story. And it elicited so much in me, but one of the biggest things as a sibling and,
Mm.
uncle and, partner and friend, just hearing her, the ways that she embodied care and
Yeah.
protection, right, gave me hope that I could do that in my relationships for the people I love. And once again, that's so many of our participants, when they would hear a story, also felt empowered, right? Or also
Yeah.
remembered moments when, that didn't happen, or someone didn't intervene on their behalf, or they didn't intervene on someone else's behalf,
Yeah.
right? And they had to move through either grief or disappointment or shame, but it was all on the way to hope
Yeah.
that in the next moment they could do something different. So there's just something about hearing one another's stories, cultivating hope, as you were just sharing, that just comes to mind.
Yeah. It's the domino effect, right? Like every story in itself is a Morgan story. There are ways in her story involved a school setting, her caring for someone more vulnerable than her brother who was mistreated. But then it kind of unravels all the characters and lack of characters in a setting like that. In this season, to all our listeners, we've asked all our guests around their first memory of difference, right? And when you continue our curriculum in most settings, we then build on the story prompt to ask if you could have a do over in an imaginary world and just rerun those events for a different outcome, what would that look like? And it's one of my favorite questions because our story prompts we process here is because it illuminates so much like the characters and people in our audience, our participants, our clients can really see themselves or relate. I and that's something I believe that's well understood in a way, like great storytelling does lead to better connection. I love the Naira Wahid quote. Some people, when they hear your story, contract, right? Because even that, you know this, Dwight, we're trainers, we're facilitators, yes, but we're trained as researchers too, right? Because we don't want to judge that contraction. We want to get you in a place where you're observing it. And some of our guests, I feel like that came up in our podcast, in the episodes, either physical contraction, right? Or how they even understand their stories. And that's what I love most about this work, that especially coming out in the podcast, is that we're working with storytellers. Of course, they're professional ones, such as Osahon, a filmmaker, a poet, right? Dr. Ford, who has been head of school, but has also like led a lot of community spaces. I think what the our work offers is skill set for the storytellers, right? A way for them to really, even if they've done this their whole life, to really support themselves in the process, you know? To be able to name, okay, actually, when I look back, I see no images there, but I see all these other images, and that's actually taking me somewhere else. That's what I'm most proud of, right? Like, I
Hmm.
believe everyone's a storyteller, everyone's a creator, right? But for those of us, and in my intro, I say reluctant creative because for better or for worse, I feel like I've been a storyteller, architect my whole life. But for those of us drawn or compelled to this lifestyle, we need help. We need help. And as much as people are influenced and impacted when we speak, do we contract when we tell our stories? Are we open? Are we numb? Are we running? Are we hiding? And not even the goal of changing anything, right? Just to understand. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm thinking about, right, I would add Lisa also in
Mm,
there as our list of professional storytellers.
yeah.
But then I think about Merrill, who's a musician, right? And she's painting stories in this different way, through music, and Brian Jordan as well, who is a incredible musician and singer, vocalist,
Mm-hmm.
instrumentalist. So the ways that art helps us tell stories, and even Mona, who came
Yeah.
to us as a relative of our producer and has done a lot of work leading local initiatives on racial
Yes.
equity and just community programming. But she supports people to tell stories, right? So there's something about, and it feels so, in the ways that it feels natural, right? I think it's so human to tell stories and to have, our cultures, no matter what our backgrounds are, you sort of eventually you go back far enough, you get to the fact that your ancestors had oral traditions, would pass stories down, fables,
Hmm.
understanding of the world around you, the plants, the animals, the roles in your culture, society. We use stories to tell those things and to pass information, wisdom, warnings, wisdom and warnings down to one
Yes.
another. And there's just something so powerful about and healing about really stepping into storytelling, narrating our own lives, our experiences, giving voice to them. I hear Doc say this all the time, just falling in love with our stories, either the
Yeah.
tragedy and triumph of them.
Yeah.
So healing.
Yeah. Falling in love with your story. That is something Dr. Stevenson leaves with. That's what we stand on. And I think, or I know this to be true, the ability to make meaning out of your story, even if it's not love yet. And that's across research, honestly. When we look at, I spent some time working with migrant youth in East Africa and in refugee settings who've been exposed to chronic and acute trauma. And a lot of the research supporting their care and well-being, and those that migrants have even resettled abroad, right? Is that if they can make meaning out of their experiences, rather that's connected to a faith practice, their purpose, their family role. And I want to be careful to say this is not like a glorification of any trauma they've experienced, right? But if they can place in, weave in the narrative of the before, during, and after, they have a lot, their outcomes are a lot better than most, right? And for those of our guests that have made meaning out of certain of these experiences, Inua's story, for example, he was very clear, it was at age 4, 5. And the very moment I was separated from my twin in a classroom that I felt a shatter in me, right? Maybe, the launch of a lot of themes around forced movement and migration for him. Or Brian, who is an artist that made meaning of his family, not only in his artistry and how he talks about his family, but in his role as a father and what it would mean to name his son after his grandfather, who he loved dearly, also wanted to hold accountable. Now the webs we tell, and then this is where my mind spins at like a 12, Dwight. It never ends. And that's the best part, right? Like when we show you how to breathe, and these are just the beginning skills, when we show you how to breathe in the moment, name your emotions, scale them, color them, name the image, name the self-talk. There's no ending to where that will lead you, right? But as a tool, we're teaching the skill. So I'm very happy to like show these storytellers, all of us, that that's possible. To like grow within your story.
We could talk so much about season 1, Shamm, and we want to leave people coming back. So our
Yeah.
plan right now is to have another season. And so once again, we just want to thank all of our guests, thank our listeners, and thank you to Lion Story, the leadership at Lion Story, Lisa, our board, Dr. Stevenson, Dr. Peterson, just everyone who helps this project take flight. Peterson, Marty, our
Mhm.
entire Lion Story team, and we can't wait to come back to you with more conversations, more stories, and we just thank you so much for tuning in, and please join us next season for season 2. We promise it's going to be awesome, plus, and depthful and emotional. We promise you it's going to be emotional. And we can't wait to see you next time. So just thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Stories That Stay, how stories of identity shape us. This podcast is a project of Lion Story. To learn more about Lion Story and our work, please visit lionstory.org. This episode was produced and edited by Peterson Toscano. Music during our mindful moment comes from Dwight Dunston himself. Other music comes from epicsound.com. For our listeners, know that we are here to help you build the real courage, practical language, and skills to navigate discomfort with compassion and clarity, starting with yourself. If you found value in today's episode, please consider leaving a review, subscribing, or sharing this with someone who needs it or might enjoy it. Your support helps us grow our healing community with practical learning resources, training opportunities, individuals and communities that need these skills the most. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep telling your story. You are your most important listener. Thank you. Together Alliance Story, an organization grounded in over 35 years of research in psychology, racial socialization, and human development, Dwight and I have spent the last 5 years training thousands of people to confront identity-based stress and transform their stories into tools for healing and change for home, for the office, for navigating online, but most importantly, within themselves.
Each episode, we will offer practical tools and reflective questions to help you navigate identity and difference with more clarity and less fear. Whether you're an educator, organizer, artist, or someone simply trying to make sense of what you've been feeling in the world around you, you're in the right place.
In our opening inaugural season, we've explored stories of resilience, rupture, and repair, guided by people who have found language for their truths. Fair warning, it always gets emotional here, but for us, that's the point. Research shows that when we can feel and name our emotions clearly, we create the conditions for healing, so that we are better equipped to meet whatever comes next with clarity, connection, and courage.